I'm Claudia Catania, and you're listening to Playing on Air. You are about to hear a James Stevenson commission for short comedic play, the world premiere of Jared and Ivanka's Parent-Teacher Conference at Maurice J. Feldman Jewish Day School by Jonathan Spector. Spector returns after his recent Playing on Air debut with his short thriller, Owner-Occupy. Jared and Ivanka's Parent-Teacher Conference at Maurice J. Feldman Jewish Day School is directed by Daniel Aukin, multiple Obie winner and director of Broadway, Off-Broadway, and major regional theaters. Aukin's cast includes Paul Sparks, who played Mickey Doyle on Boardwalk Empire, Thomas Yates on House of Cards. On film, he's starred in Mud and The Greatest Showman, among many. Dan's cast also includes Tracee, Chimo, Pallero. In demand on TV, Broadway, and off-Broadway stages, you can see Tracee on Netflix's Private Life and Orange is the New Black. You're also about to hear Cindy Cheung and Thomas J. Ryan, who have brightened innumerable Broadway and off-Broadway stages. On TV, you can catch Cindy on The Sinner and Awkwafina is from Queens. If you were lucky, you caught Thomas J. Ryan in Broadway's recent The Crucible, or saw him on film, from his title role in Henry Fool to his title role in Degas and the Dancer. And now, Jared and Ivanka's Parent-Teacher Conference at Maurice J. Feldman Jewish Day School. We're at a parent-teacher conference. It's 2020.
Ivanka, Jared, thank you so much for making this time. I know how busy you both are.
To you as well.
Hello.
And Rabbi Kaufman should be joining the Zoom. Let me just text him and make sure he has the link. Ah, here he is.
Good morning, all.
And just to alleviate any concerns, I'll tell you off the bat, your children are doing very well. And we'll get into specifics, of course. But first, the rabbi had another subject he wanted to. Rabbi?
Yes, thank you, Carmia. So, as you both are aware, as part of choosing to join this community, you made a commitment to not just your children's secular and religious education, but more broadly, to embracing the Jewish values that are at the center of everything we do. And Ivanka, as someone who is not Jewish by birth, it has been my experience that the commitment of converts can often be even stronger than for those of us who happen to be Jewish simply as the result of good fortune.
It's been such a great life decision for me. I am very modern, but I'm also a very traditional person. And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition in how I was raised as well. I really find that with Judaism, it creates an amazing blueprint for family connectivity.
Ivanka's such a type A. She gets it done. She said, if we're going to do Shabbos, I'm going to cook. She's never cooked before in her life and became a great cook.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, I should say, as a rule, the school has a neutral stance toward politics. Over the years, many people in government positions sent their children here, people of all political persuasion, and all are welcome, as long as they agree with our values and hold a desire to pass those values on to their children. These values include, of course, Kedusha, Tikkun Olam, Kehillah, but today I wanted to speak specifically about the values of Emunah and Achrayut.
Do either of you speak Hebrew?
Not yet, but I've been trying to use this time to expand my own mind and explore things I wouldn't have prioritized. So I've got a Coursera free course going in Greek and Roman mythology. So I'm rereading the Odyssey and started to really learn to play the guitar, and now I'm really working on it.
One of Margaret Thatcher's many adages says, look at a day when you were supremely satisfied at the end. It's not a day when you lounge around doing nothing. It's when you've had everything to do and you've done it.
Right. So, Emunah means faith.
but more broadly can be understood to be honesty and integrity in general.
And achrayut, it comes from the acher, meaning other.
So this we understand to mean our responsibility to others.
You have to be judging yourself to make sure what you're doing is the right thing, and you feel good about it.
Yes, exactly. And we find that children, they're just such sponges of information. We can talk to them about these values, but they are also going to absorb the way the adults in their lives demonstrate them. Do you know what we mean?
Absolutely. I remember once my father and I were walking down Fifth Avenue, and there was a homeless person sitting right outside of Trump Tower. And I think I was maybe 9, 10, something like this. It was around the same time of the divorce. And I remember my father pointing to him and saying, "You know that guy has $8 billion more than me." Because he was in such extreme debt at that point, you know. And me thinking, you know, what are you talking about? He was sitting outside of Trump Tower, and I'm looking at him and going, and you know, I didn't understand. And I think I just thought about it like a year or two ago, and you know, I found it interesting. You know, it makes me all the more proud of my parents that they got through that.
And my father, he was an amazing businessman. He was an amazing father. Things turned in a direction that was unfortunate, and I have a lot of respect for how my father handled himself after.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to to pry, but just so we're clear, this unfortunate direction, this was when your father paid a prostitute to seduce his own brother, filmed it, and then blackmailed him?
Carmia, please.
He acted, I think, in a very respectful manner, and we all became better from the experience.
And I always think no matter what I hear about my parents, about my family, there's some sort of pride in the fact that people would take an interest in me just because I'm part of them.
That's right.
Okay. Well, it seems we are on the same page about the impression parents can make on their children. And so I must direct your attention to the school community agreement regarding precautions around our response to coronavirus.
This is a great success story, and that's, I think, what really needs to be told.
No, I don't mean your very important work with the government. It's that you agreed to abide by the rules, to quarantine if you've been traveling, and to always wear masks whenever you're outside the home, adhere to social distancing, and that this agreement in our community relies on, well, when we have this event on the television with the Supreme Court Justice and the Rose Garden, and there is television footage and photographs, and neither of you are wearing masks indoors or out. And so I think there is a discomfort among some of the parents and the faculty that there is a desire to express. But, as we are in a Jewish place of learning, I would prefer to formulate it as a question and ask you both how you feel these actions align with your commitment to emunah, to trust.
I disagree with the premise of your question. I think a lot of people think it's been a great success.
Again, we are not here to discuss your work with the president. You are a family in our community, and it is only in this context that...
I don't think when you're working in the context of a family business, I don't think there's such a thing. You know, that's part of the challenge, to find that space for yourself and to carve out the meaningful time with my children and Jared.
Ivanka's an amazing mother.
Thank you. And you know, Jared is incredibly smart, very talented, has enormous capacity. He is humble in the recognition of what he doesn't know, and is tremendously secure in his ability to seek informed viewpoints.
I'm sure that's true, but...
Look, it's very simple. You can't stay at the school if you don't abide by the school agreements.
We observe the Sabbath. From Friday to Saturday, we don't do anything but hang out with one another. We don't make phone calls.
The time with the kids. We feel it's like sand through an hourglass, and pretty soon it'll be over.
Well, that's a common feeling for parents. But as Carmia said, If you want to continue at this school, we will need you to affirm that from this day forward you can commit absolutely to the school's COVID protocols. If not, you will, I'm sorry, be asked to leave.
My grandparents survived the Nazis.
So did mine.
My grandparents were on the precipice of life and death, and they came to this country, and 70 years later, their grandson is working in the White House.
I'm not sure the relevance of this.
What I have learned is that we don't just make the waves. We have to surf the waves as well as we can. God makes the waves.
Please, we're not talking about Hashem. We're talking wearing masks. People are very, very upset. Do you understand?
I remember once I was on a job in Australia, and I was at some, after celebrating party because the fashion shows were there. And this man walks up to me who I'd never met before and says, "What does it feel like to be wealthy?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "What does it feel like never to have felt any pain?" And that really upset me. Not because I was upset for myself, but because I was upset for him. Like I was bothered by the fact that he could be so ignorant and that there are people out there who could say such a blanketed thing and just be so downright stupid and just, not use the brain that they have. And that's what bothered me. Not the fact that he could not the fact that anything he said, wounded me deeply. Just the fact that there really are people out there who think like that.
People get jealous of success. I've had a lot of success in many different business realms. I grasped things very quickly. I went to Harvard.
Yes, you and I were actually there at the same time.
Of course, I knew that.
We had Shabbos dinner together many times at the Chabad
I remember
house.
my sophomore year, I was sick with the flu, and the wife of the rabbi who ran the Shabbat Center, who just was this amazing woman, brought me homemade matzo ball soup.
And we also had a course together, a seminar on Hannah Arendt.
Brought it right to my dorm room. I think she made it from scratch, just for me.
You rarely came to class. I don't know how you passed. If you passed, you probably don't remember.
What I remember is I ate the soup and felt revitalized. My roommate was off somewhere, in the library, or maybe staying over in his girlfriend's room. He was a Reform Jew. He hadn't been to a Friday night meal in over 2 years, so you never knew what he was going to be up to. And looking back, I must have still been a bit feverish because I wandered out into the quad. It was a cold night, but I was sweating.
I remember once I was at a party. It was one of those nights. You're in your early 20s, and you and your friends are just tumbling forward through the city, from dinner at Per Se to dancing at Bungalow 8, to suddenly you're on the rooftop of someone's penthouse on Fifth Avenue, and Chelsea Clinton was there, and we'd been friendly for a long time. She relied on me a bit, I think, for fashion advice, since that didn't come as naturally to her as it did to me. And Natalie Portman was there. She and Jared were pretty close in college, though not as much anymore. We've lost a lot of friends since we got into politics.
I call it an exfoliation.
But back then, I had so many friends, and we were all standing there on that rooftop, watching the sun come up, looking out at the skyline. And as a kid, rather than getting Barbie dolls when I used to get upset, I always wanted Legos or erector sets or something like that. So I love, looking at the New York skyline and being able to figure out what I'm going to add to that, What patch of sky maybe one of my buildings is going to be in. It's in the blood, I guess.
I ended up writing my honors thesis on Hannah Arendt, on this interview she did in the 60s, not long after she'd published Eichmann in Jerusalem, and there was a blowback. People attacking the sort of cavalier tone she used to describe this Nazi war criminal. And she said, the thing was, I really thought Eichmann was a fool. I read the transcript of his police hearing. I read it very carefully. I laughed countless times. I laughed out loud because he was so stupid. People were offended by this. But I can't do anything about it.
And I was standing there on the rooftop, watching the shadows on the street below start to fill in with color as the sun came up, and the party was still going on around me, but I was suddenly alone, in that way that you can find yourself more deeply alone in a crowd than you could ever be by yourself. And as the shapes of people on the streets below started to come into focus, they were moving fast, scurrying, rushing about to their lives and their jobs and their families. And I had this flash of understanding of what it must be like to live in an ant colony. You know that there are ant colonies that are 4,000 miles long. Millions and millions of ants who each are singularly focused on a task. And they find fulfillment in that task. They find meaning. And most of them probably aren't even aware that they are working in service of the queen. But they need a queen. Without a queen, they'd be lost.
And I was standing there in the quad, sweating. I was so hot, and I opened my bathrobe and took it off, and was just standing there in my boxer briefs. People were walking by and staring at me, but I didn't see anybody I knew. I had a lot of friends. I was very popular, but I only made friends with people who seemed like they were going to matter one day. So there were a lot of people I didn't know. It was a big school. And then I hear a voice calling my name. Jared! Jared! And I turn around, and it's my Zadie, my grandfather. But he doesn't look like I remember him. He's young. He's my age, maybe. About the age he was when he arrived in America as a refugee. And he says...
And Aukin says, the thing about Eichmann was he wasn't some evil genius like Iago or Kaiser Soze, that he was totally ordinary. Except for one thing, his extreme commitment to advancing his own career. Except for that, he didn't have any motives at all, and literally never thought about the consequences of his actions beyond that. There was no depth to his thoughts. He was like an embodiment of pure thoughtlessness.
And it was such a remarkable feeling of transcendence, of connectivity to the past and the future. Before they blocked me on social media, I saw a bunch of former friends talking about what it felt like to do ayahuasca. And it sounds a lot like that. Because I saw straight to Queens, to those apartment buildings my grandfather so generously constructed, bringing affordable housing to those in need, onto my father's skyscrapers, the tallest, most beautiful buildings in the history of Manhattan, and straight past that, out into the future to the buildings I would build. And the people moving around below on the streets, that they all played a key part in this grand story. Whether they knew it or not, they were serving us. Without them, our vision couldn't be fulfilled. And I, too, I was serving them, making the spaces for them to live those lives. We were all connected. And that's when I knew. And it's an honor. It's an honor to be their queen.
And my grandfather said, Jared, I'm proud of you. Every day, you make me prouder and prouder and prouder and prouder with everything you do. But especially today of all days. And I was trying to think what I had done that day, aside from being sick and eating matzo ball soup. What could I have done that could make him say that? And I was sort of glancing down at my feet. You know how sometimes when you're thinking hard, you sort of look away without even realizing it? So I was looking at my feet, and when I looked back up, he was gone. And then I realized I hadn't done anything different that day. So the thing that made him so proud, the thing that was so special, was just me being me. And I can keep doing that.
And she said he was genuinely incapable of uttering a single sentence that was not a cliché.
This is a great success story. I think that's what really needs to be told.
That he would just keep repeating, word for word, the same stock phrases and self-invented cliches.
The reason we've been working so hard is we feel it's like sand through an hourglass, and pretty soon it'll be over. So we're going to work as hard as we can to make as much of an impact as we can.
And she said, the longer one listened to him, the more obvious it became that his inability to speak was closely connected with an inability to think, and that evil comes from a failure to think.
Carmilla, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think perhaps their screen is frozen.
Is it? Jared, Ivanka, can you hear us? We've lost your video. Can either of you hear me? Rabbi, do you want me to try to get them back on the call?
No, that's fine. Let's just move on. I think we've given them enough of our time.
You just heard Jared and Ivanka's parent-teacher conference at Maurice J. Feldman Jewish Day School, a world premiere by Jonathan Spector, commissioned by the James Stevenson Commissions for Short Comedic Play. It was directed by Daniel Aukin and featured Paul Sparks as Jared, Cindy Cheung as Ivanka, Tracee Chimo Pallero as Carmilla, and Thomas J. Ryan as Rabbi Kaufman, head of school. All thanks to Josephine Merck for her sponsorship of the James Stevenson Commissions for Short Comedic Play.
I'm Jonathan Spector. I'm playwright of Jared and Ivanka's Parent-Teacher Conference Day at Maurice J. Feldman Jewish Day School.
I'm Daniel Aukin, and I'm the director.
I'm Cindy Cheung. I play Ivanka.
I'm Paul Sparks, and I'm reading Jared Kushner.
I am Thomas J. Ryan, and I read The Rabbi.
Hi, I'm Tracee Chimo Pallero, and I read Carmilla.
Welcome, welcome. Jonathan, what was the germ of the idea for this play?
I remember reading a news story about Jared and Ivanka being pushed out of their Orthodox Jewish day school as a result of violating the COVID policies. But that lodged in my brain, particularly because, they as people who seem so to care about nothing except themselves, I've always wondered how to square that with commitment to sort of being Orthodox Jews, but aren't sort of driven by a religious zeal, seem to be driven only by thoughtlessness and selfishness, which is how it connected with Hannah Arendt.
Daniel, what drew you to Jonathan's play, and what were your first takes when you read it?
I read it and I just thought it was a really exciting and funny and also kind of serious piece of writing. I know Jonathan from reading one of his plays and from this play. I mean, I think he's a fantastic writer.
When you all read the title and realized that two people in Jonathan's comedy are major public figures, what jumped to your mind?
As an actor, it's always a fun exercise to play someone who play a character that's based on a real person, and to, jump on the internet and see what fun mannerisms and behavior and choices a person makes in their interview, and gives me something to play with.
I also think these two are quite interesting. They've been in the public now for these past few years. Strangely, they're kind of hard to figure out, exactly like what exactly are they doing and who are they? And in a way that sort of Sphinx-like personality trait that they both have, I think that it's curious to think about them. And I know that Jonathan had said that, especially in the beginnings of this play, that he pulled directly from things they've actually said. Like these are things they've said. This is not some made up bunch of words. It's interesting to try and imagine them. You know what I mean, in this type of scenario.
Thomas, as the rabbi in charge of this school and in a city and business with its share of self-absorbed people, how do you think the rabbi does as an educator, dealing with the occasional egocentricity that surface?
He's sort of a depressing character in this play, the rabbi, because he's the voice of moderation, or the attempted voice of moderation, and it's futile. I don't like that message personally. I feel like it's sad. I mean, I like to think that ultimately in our politics, there's a way to talk to people on the other side and find some sort of common conversation. And the point of my character is that, he makes his best faith effort in the beginning, and he tries to be fair and not rash and not abrupt and not judgmental. And all he can do is become quiet, because ultimately he fails. That's very true to our political moments, I'm afraid. I feel it all the time myself. You resent the poles, the polar opposites sort of fighting at high volume, but ultimately, unless you engage in one of those two polar opposites, you're not in the conversation, or you feel you're not.
Well, I mean, in the case of social media, it's definitely made a lot of people who might have felt very lonely and marginalized in all kinds of situations and communities feel like there is a community and are other people, and that's an amazing and wonderful thing. And at the same time, it has also clearly fractured things to a place where everybody, where the narratives about who we are as a society are more fractured.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like you see it in this play. It's funny, like the way Ivanka talks about herself and the way that Jared also speaks about himself. There is something made me laugh internally of just imagining these two people on the other end of this Zoom call. Like, what the are you talking about? It's just so strange that like they kind of go off on these tangents that are totally self-reflective. It's all about the self, that it makes me think, it reminds me of what social media has done in the sense that like everybody posts their everything now, and with just the generalized assumption that everybody else cares. And so listening to their stories, I was thinking about that. Like, oh my gosh, these two people just spewing.
I remember coming out of the 70s, everybody called that decade the me decade because everyone was so narcissistic. So sometimes I think, well, I don't know, maybe this is just a sort of natural, sort of cyclical thing that we decide that our problem is we're all narcissists. I don't know whether social media has done it. It certainly looks like it has. I certainly post all the time, Tracee. I know you do too.
It is kind of a simultaneous thing where people do have a place that they can go, that they can be heard. The problem is that it's become monetized, and the people that are sort of in charge of social media have figured out how to like take advantage of the platform in a way that creates more wealth for them. And unfortunately, these algorithms and things that they have, they've figured out that if the more fractious it is, the more, which is actually to me is not humanity. Like I don't know a lot of people that like walk around ready to fight. And yet that's what that community is like on social media. And so to me, I don't understand exactly why it's happening, but I suspect the reason it's happening is because corporations have realized that this is a way to generate revenue. And so we think, erroneously, I think, that we're these like cutthroat, awful people who are like trying to harm each other.
And also social media it's such a powerful tool for advertising, for people to get themselves seen and known as a certain brand. And not everybody should have that power. And it's so easily abused. And in our, celebrity-loving culture, that is the ultimate goal for so many people who are active on there. And so I think that just leads to a host of problems.
Anybody want to talk a bit about Hannah Arendt? She figures in this play.
Yeah, Hannah Arendt was influential in a bunch of different ways, specifically what began as a New Yorker series of New Yorker articles and became a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she was chronicling Eichmann's trial. And I mean, he was sort of one of the architects of the Holocaust, but was, in her telling very much a sort of bureaucrat who just sort of did what he did and without any thought to the sort of morality of it, nor really driven by sort of a zeal for the cause as much as just because it was sort of the thing that he was doing. And but yeah, I think most famously in our culture, it's where the phrase "the banality of evil" comes from. Is from that book, which I think is something many of us have contemplated a lot over the previous 4 years.
I feel very privileged to be in the room with you all. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you for inviting
so
us.
much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You've been listening to Playing on Air, great American short plays with great American actors. Theme and play music by Tom Cochan. Marketing and communications, Yvonne Jones. Audio editing, Rachel Creedberg. Recording and sound design, John Kilgore. Playing on Air is distributed by PRX, Public Radio Exchange. For Playing on Air, I'm your host, Claudia Catania. Thanks for listening.